South Africa. I'm sure most of you know who he is. If not, Lee, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. I am Lee Berger. I am an explorer for National Geographic. I'm also a professor at the University of the Witwatersrand. And I'm here in South Africa right now, actually awaiting lockdown.
Yeah, that's definitely something we're dealing with here in the United States already. But it gives us a lot of extra time to do some extracurricular activities, I suppose.
Actually, yeah, I'm working on a new museum that we're calling the Malapa Museum. It's going to be a place where we're displaying all the discoveries from Malapa at the site itself, as well as discoveries from Gladysville and from Metsetse.
That is amazing. That's hopefully something I wish to see one day. How's that work going?
Oh, it's going great. I've actually set up a recording studio here in my apartment. I'm working on scripts, working with artists around the world, doing the designs for the various artworks. So it's pretty productive.
That's wonderful. Hopefully again I get to see that. I'm so excited. Do you have any similar plans with the Rising Star site, or is that still open?
No, so the Rising Star site, we're going to do an entirely different thing than a traditional museum. What we're actually doing is building a virtual reality tour, because at Rising Star, you can't actually go into the cave.
Of course.
And so we're building a walkway across the surface, and periodically you'll be able to stop and view in augmented virtual reality what's directly below your feet, say 30 or 40 meters underground.
That is awesome. Now, since we're talking about sites already, I just want to pop this question out real quick. I have heard through a few unnamed sources you might have a new site.
We actually have more than one news site. We've been running a National Geographic hill exploration program for the last 5 years. And that project has not only gone over the sites that I discovered back in 2008 before we described Malapa and Sediba, but it's discovered about another 500 or 600 cave sites and another 200 or so fossil sites.
Oh, wow.
Within those, we have got right now about 4 completely new hominid sites that had never been discovered before. And we've got about 6 new Homo Naledi localities.
Oh, wow.
Within the Rising Star system that are not part of what's been described for the Dinaledi chamber and the Sediba chamber.
Wow, that is great news to hear. I'm just so excited to hear that development.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
I don't know how much you're willing to talk about, but do these new Homo Naledi discoveries give any leeway to your ideas towards intentional burial or not? Or do they, yeah.
Sure. It's a logical question to ask. When we announced the idea of intentionality of the placement of Homo Naledi in the Dinaledi chamber, we were very careful to not use the word burial.
Okay, excuse me.
Burial implies sort of a secondary intention or complex secondary ritual behavior. So we use the word deliberate ritualized body disposal.
Okay.
And what we meant by that is repeated placement of bodies within the Dinaledi chamber. Our new work, which has been conducted both in the Dinaledi chamber and another area closer to where we come in called the hill antechamber, as well as work in the Sediba chamber, has shed light on the deliberate body disposal question. I'm not going to reveal what that is right now, but you can expect that hopefully towards the latter part of this year, a significant announcement related to the idea of Homo Naledi and its complexity.
That is awesome to hear. That is, Homo Naledi is something that has just absolutely captured my fantasy and is one of the things that drives me so deeply into this field. And to hear that is just so lightning.
Well, and believe me, mine too.
Yes, I'm sure. I'm sure. Now, so Homo Naledi is obviously huge. It's massive. But so is Sediba. Do you feel that your discovery of Homo Naledi has at all overshadowed your discovery of Sediba?
I would hope not. I think if you look at the science that's been put out around Sediba, Sediba has almost twice the number of scientific papers. It's included in every study. It is at a more mature stage, obviously. It's although it's remarkably only been about 11 and a half years since the discovery. It's used in practically every scientific study. It did take a bit of a backburner, the excavations, obviously, with the discovery of Homo Naledi, because the team that we had and the team that we developed, that beyond that, had to develop methods to cope with the thousands of fossils that came from Homo Naledi. I mean, it's hard to often put in perspective for Homo Naledi. I would guess right now we're probably sitting at about 2,300, 2,400 individual elements. And we have left hundreds, if not thousands of elements in the various stages that we can either see or know exist by extension. And so just dealing with that on a curatorial level, on a scientific level, has been was an initial challenge. Sediba grew less quickly during that time because I wasn't focusing a huge amount of effort on the excavation. Expect that to change in the near future, depending on the coronavirus, because literally we were launching a major excavation at Malapa last week, which was shut down completely yesterday.
Oh, that is so unfortunate.
Well, the whole world's in that place.
Yeah. We'll make it through. But that is just so fascinating about Sediba and how your two discoveries just commingle into this broader view of human evolution is I just love it. And the way that one of the things that I admire most about you is the way you've approached open education. The way that you're doing this interview, for example, the way that you have done what you can do to share the information, to share the fossils. I mean, I have this right here, solely thanks to you on MofoSource.
Is that this one, right?
I believe so, yes. And I've got a few more coming in the mail from, I think, our mutual friend, Molly Selva.
Sure, right.
And the way you've approached education has really just blown my mind and just opened the doors for so many people. I just can't thank you enough.
Well, one of the things that struck me when I first got into this field, I was very privileged. I was able to come to Africa very early, first to Kenya, then to South Africa, where there was this large fossil collection in the University of Vietnam. I very quickly made some small discoveries, but at those times were considered big discoveries because there were so few fossils. And I became chair. I took over the chair of paleoanthropology at a very young age. And what I learned in that very privileged position, I didn't like very much. And that was the idea that there was a small privileged few that had access to original fossils, that there was a behavior of not publishing replicable data, the measurements were published. And if you go back into those papers of the 70s, 90s, even in the early 21st century, there is a dearth of replicable data. You kind of have to take the word for that. That bothered me immensely. And so when I finally had the opportunity with the discovery of Sediba to actually change that, because I could control that in its entirety, I did. I made sure that we released cast, that we showed cast to scientists prior to the publications, and that we released shape files and all the numbers in every publication we ever did. And the reason for that was, I think replication data is the definition of science. If you don't have that, I'm not sure it is a science. And so, without being hypercritical about the past, if you can't test what someone else is saying, then I'm not sure it's actually a scientific question.
I fully agree with that. I mean, the whole basis of science, like you said, is the ability to retest the hypothesis over and over and to prove whether it's feasible or not. And if you're not able to do that, I don't see how you move forward.
There were also other mythologies that were pitched into that. There was very much the feeling in the 90s and the early 21st century that if we operated a open access or open collaboration policy, that your casting departments would close down that are based here in Africa, that the resources that theoretically would come into universities or museums would be swept up by foreign universities, largely in the developed world, and that you would never be able to develop your own scientists. What I think we demonstrated clearly with Sediba and almost on steroids with Naledi is that that's not true. That we have made hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars with casting, even though you can download and print every one of our fossils for free. We just change the model by which it's done so that there actually are jobs, it's self-funding, and the resources accrue to researchers and people living here in Africa. We also showed that you could, by giving this away for free, you didn't lose anything in the publication sphere. That the publications on Naledi and Sediba consistently ranked in the top 1% of all cited research in this field every year, at least for the last 3 years. And those are important to understand because it proves that model is false. We've also brought in millions and millions of rands and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in equipment and technology to Africa that stays in Africa. And I think all those are really important lessons by people who are discovering fossils, and mostly in paleoanthropology, it's in the developing world, should look at. We can show them those numbers and show them that that was a mythology that we disproved.
And that you have done, for sure. I think it's just, I just think it's wonderful. I mean, I love reading books about like the hominid gang and, you know, Richard Leakey and things like that. But it always it always just somewhere deep down bothers me a little that these discoveries weren't shared as well as Homo Naledi is, like how much more we could have learned. But at the same time, I realized it was a different world.
It was a different world, and these fossils were rare. You know, they're not now, but they were. And I think the idea of scarce resources drove a lot of that behavior that occurred in the 70s and 80s and 90s, early 21st century. The idea that somehow the discoverers of these things were touched by something special, and you had to be privileged, and it almost became a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Okay.
You know, you're a young scientist. You probably read, you know, Tim White's read of the Paleoanthropology and Millennium, published in 2000, which, you know, that's the way we thought. And I was a poster child of it. I'd come to Africa in 1989. I found my first fragment of fossil on my first day at Kubi Forum. I found 2 hominid teeth in Latticeville in 1991, and then went 17 years for a single major discovery. I was the poster child for these things that didn't exist.
Right. And now look at you.
Well, and now in the last 5 years, our teams here have discovered more hominid fossils than in the entire history of the search for human origins in Africa prior to that. And it's not just us. It's happening everywhere. It's happening in Europe. It's happening in Asia. It's happening in Asia. And I think what happened was we had created a self-fulfilling prophecy. We had followed a method of exploration and discovery that had followed what we had learned from a past that went back 120 years into European archaeology and paleoanthropology. And by rigidly following that method, the same type of sites, in the same way, the fossils did become rarer and rarer and rarer.
Right.
When that model broke, because younger scientists like myself and others couldn't get access to the field, couldn't get access into these well-studied fossil fields, and were actually being pushed sideways because we didn't have major discoveries. It forced us to be effectively creative and entrepreneurial. Technology did help, but I actually think it really goes down to also the development of exploration sciences in the regions and countries where these fossils can potentially be found. And what that means is, for example, my team spends 300 days a year in the field. If you are doing what we often call parachute science, only coming into Africa or Asia or Indonesia or Europe only during the Northern Hemisphere summer holidays, and only spending 4 to 8 weeks in the field, well, it's no wonder you're only finding 4 or 5 fossils. If you just multiply that out, we're probably about on that same discovery rate.
That's amazing. I just had something. Anyway, with the rate of fossil discovery, do you think, like you said, do you think we're just looking hard? Or I remember what it was. One of your favorite things I've noticed to discuss is backyard syndrome.
Yeah.
How important do you think of a role that plays in finding fossils?
I think it plays a role in not just finding fossils, in almost every aspect of science and the exploration sciences. I think that it is a terrific hindrance to making new discoveries. What we do is, even the way we issue permits, where the same team go to the same places over and over and over, you actually are entrenching a form of backyard syndrome. The idea that you absolutely know this area better than anyone else. You have seen everything. And therefore, there's nothing new to discovery. And therefore, you don't walk over that hill behind a latrine of your camp because you've been there so often. I was, again, a poster child. People often forget that I spent 17 years in this Dolomitic region, which is literally right behind me, about 30 kilometers in that direction. And I spent 17 years there looking and missed all of this stuff. What broke that was a complete loss of funding for exploration. A very tough period in my life where I had to reinvent myself and then combine that with the technology of Google Earth as I was trying to find a new form of exploration since everything else I'd done is failed. That forced me to look at every site as opposed to the sites I knew that were going to have something. And that's why Palapa is so different than every other site.
Right, right. I mean, it's definitely, I'm sure a lot of us would find a lot of things if we went in our backyards.
Sure.
Like, you know, who knows what's back there, really. But with the Malapa finds and the Rising Star finds, this might be the hardest question I'm asking you. Do you have a favorite?
Oh, no. In fact, the next one I haven't found is my favorite.
That's a great way to look at it.
I was actually talking with a reporter about this a few days ago. I am a big science fiction. I have been since a child, and I remember first reading Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit when I was a child and a teenager, and I immediately took something out there that often isn't highlighted, and that is that the message I thought he was trying to speak to me was that never let things possess you. Never, the more precious something is, or at least the more precious something feels, the more it has the opportunity to take over you, and in a very negative way. And so when I came to the field of paleoanthropology, where I knew that we were looking for the world's rarest sought after,
right.
I recognized early that they had the potential of becoming golden rings. And that if they, and I swore, even when I first interviewed him, that if I ever made a major discovery, that I would do the version of finding the nearest volcano and Mount Doom and throw it in. And because the message was there are plenty of gold rings out there. And so that's often what drives the idea of open collaboration. Okay. By making it available, it gives it to every science. Besides the idea that I think that's the right way of doing science, it makes sure that none of that can ever possess me. And so I very seriously say that the best discovery, my favorite discovery, is the next one I haven't.
That's an amazing way to look at it. And just as a fellow complete Tolkien buff, I totally agree with everything you just said. Switching gears a little bit to genetics, do you think we will see either DNA or proteins from Homo naledi?
Well, don't write off either so early yet. We have tried on bone in both Sediba and Naledi to get DNA. Then Sediba was tried 7 or 8 years ago, so obviously it's progressed a long time since then. What we did find in those early experiments was proteins.
Okay.
It's just no one knew what to do with them.
I see.
That science has obviously advanced massively. So I was supposed to be delivering Naledi material to Europe literally next month to run proteomics. It's not going to happen.
I see. Yeah.
But I am, and my colleagues and I are extremely confident that we will get proteomics out of Naledi, and that's going to answer things like the kin relationship of individuals, sex of these individuals. It may work out some phylogeny in the way that they've done for gigantic recently. So I'm very confident in that side. Will we get DNA? ADNA is still very young. I would not doubt it. We really did a major effort at it early on, and we will. I certain we'll get proteins out since we already did.
I agree. That is just amazing. I think we'll just have to wait and see what those tests reveal. Do you think, what are your thoughts on the idea that, I'm sure you've seen articles in the last few months, that there's a ghost species in our DNA?
Well, okay, so people have been overusing for ghost lineage, including me. I think as we become more sophisticated in analysis and analyzing DNA, analyzing it's going to become obvious that our ancestry is nothing like the purebred species that we were describing 6 or 7 years ago. It's not a straight line. It's not even any form of some lineage that can be worked out. And at every point in the past, the introgression of what we would consider paleontological or fossil species, morphological species, into our line, genetic species into our line, which we don't really understand if those two things are the same, morphology and genetic species, is going to be massive and continuous all the way back. And, you know, we kind of knew that when we discovered Sediba. You know, Sediba was so strange. It wasn't what we were supposed to find. It wasn't, it was very Homo-like in some ways. It was very Australopithecine-like in other ways. If you remember when we announced it, the field was literally divided and we'd gone the right way on attribution. Yet it didn't look anything like our kind of classic children for what ancestor the should look like. Homo Habilis, which in its entirety is based on half a dozen fragmented fossils that you could. It didn't look like the thing that immediately preceded Homo ergaster or African erectus. And so it was pointing to the idea that there was greater complexity existing. It just was so generalized, I think, and we were so entrenched in the idea at that time of Hardy, Anamensis, Afarensis, early Homo, Homo erectus, humans, that we didn't have space. That began to fall apart. You know, it fell apart with Perez, and eventually Naledi came, who is not only morphologically completely unexpected, but out of time and place.
Right.
And that was paralleled by the molecular discoveries that were occurring right at the same time, describing Neanderthal integration, Denisovans, which aren't actually another species, but something, species, and I think there are dozens of things. And you know, whether Homo Naledi is one of them, we're going to have to wait and see. I think it's pretty likely. But I also think it's almost equally as likely and maybe more exciting if Homo Naledi isn't a micro introgressor into modern humans, because then it's a huge problem for both paleoanthropology in general and this false building of time matter, which I posted I think yesterday about in relation to Sediba, but also with the idea that we can use morphology to tell time. And, or maybe most impactfully, for the entire archaeological record. Homo naledi does not spawn into existence at 200.
Right. Exactly.
Its morphology is back to an origin that is like 2 to 3 million. And that means they're all along. Perhaps interesting all the way along, and maybe in surprising ways that we haven't considered yet, or not at all. But nobody can look at this morphology and say that is not a tool maker. No one can look at these people and say by every measure prior to discovery of this, we would have said not only is that a tool maker, but a fire user, high level protein in the diet. Naledi's side of humans. They just don't look like humans.
Right, right. Now, kind of going back to Homo habilis and tool makers, what are your views on Homo habilis being the first tool maker? Or do you think Naledi or others could have been there first?
I think we should start talking about this.
Okay.
It's a ridiculous behavior that actually, came out of the idea that there was this ladder-like evolution. There is no chance, given the vicissitudes of the fossil record, of the archaeological record, that we'll ever find it first like that. Also, it's almost an insulting idea that our genius is something special. It's not. We should get over that. In the same way that I think we should stop using modern human origins behavior studies. Something like Homo Naledi says that is a that our origins is so complex with introgression, with interaction with other species. There isn't some special Da Vinci or like moment where we are touched and poof, we're modern.
Right.
What's the chance this is as complex as humans, but has nothing to do with humans 200,000 years before humans do anything as complex? That to me is a more fascinating sort of line of questioning than the idea of Naledi's the first tool maker, Homo habilis the first tool maker, because we're never going to. Likely, all hominids are tool makers.
Okay.
An interesting technical hypothesis would be: is Homo naledi the maker of the entire Middle Stone Age that we find in subequatorial Africa? Because actually, there's no sound evidence that there are large-brained hominids in subequatorial Africa in those temporal periods prior to 70 or 80,000. I'm not saying they're not there. I'm saying we need to act like scientists. Right now, you said the middle of the I would say, approaching archaeology scientifically, you would say, well, it's the hominid that we're finding in the region at the same time. What hominid is that? This one.
Right, right. It's
Because I can
explain it.
You see, we can, and that means it's a scientific question.
Exactly.
Saying that we know that modern did it, which is the sort of narrative that goes on, but we don't have it. But even in the face of something like Naledi, we're going to hold on to it. Is not very savvy, is if people still stuck to the genetics that existed prior to the publication of the double helix. It changed, and so should we.
Right, and I think that's I learn new things every day, and I try to promote the newest information that I have. That's something that I try to do. Um, Obviously, I don't know everything. I'm not up to date on everything, so certain things are going to be a little outdated, but I just love these opportunities where I get to speak to people like you and get my ideas refreshed and updated and looked at again, and I can rewrite the way I feel about these things and think about them, and then I can share that with the world, the paleoanthropology group, and it really, I've noticed a difference in a lot of people where they're actually starting to more comprehend and learn these more difficult topics once we make them more digestible.
My good friend and colleague John Fox and I are one of the reasons that we first met each other was the idea of that these scientists talk down to its audience. The way it almost became like the Catholic priest did 300 to 400 years ago, giving its sermons in Latin so that the individual priest could interpret the word of God. And to an illiterate audience, I think it's foundationally wrong. There is no reason we can not write quality science without jargon. That is the couching and complexity is just like that priest. It's trying to keep information out of the hand of. If you cannot language, and I'm not saying dumb this down. We don't use scientific terms.
Right.
I'm saying you can use scientific terms and explain those scientific terms, and you better know some of the problems you have with science and evolution in the United States is driven because the paleoanthropology for so many years was driven by a rather upper West Coast, upper East Coast science community that just regarded everyone as undeserving. And I think you created a vision. I think we created a vision. I'll take joint responsibility for that. And but I think that we need to change that and change it sooner than later. That's why we need to do things like the Rising Star Expedition. Take discovery, take these fossils out of the black box. Why can't scientists and a public audience see the discovery as it happens so they know it's real?
Mm-hmm.
Why can't they follow the science that we do in a public way? Why can't they then, once we publish our scientific papers, that they can't download those scans and take the measurements themselves? Then they will have a greater trust in what we are talking about and saying as we try to deliver science. I think climate science failed in that way in its early days, never recovered from it.
Right.
By talking down and to the audience as opposed to sharing with them all the data. I think evolutionary scientists, particularly those related to evolution, did that for many, many decades, and it was a mistake. And you're getting a little insight of why I took Homo Naledi to the Burroughs Museum in Dallas, Texas.
Yes.
It has greater impact.
I am so sad I couldn't get to see that. Which I actually had a question. With the virus going on, are they staying longer or are they?
I'm not going to talk about the security around the park. They aren't on display now, and the museum is like every other museum.
Okay, fair enough. Are there any, I know this was a one-time thing, but are there any other possibilities of Sediba or Homo Naledi getting to see the world?
Yes, we were actually exploring the idea of taking them to China. That is probably not going to happen in the near future. They were likely going to go to the World Expo in Dubai. That's going to be not going to happen now.
Right.
I am passionate about people seeing real fossils. I know a lot of my colleagues say, "Oh, the public would never know the difference between a high quality cast and the real thing," and I think that's the same sort of attitude that I was criticizing a moment ago in why we should all plain language, even with each other, when we are working in science, without losing the technical quality of the discourse.
Right, right. And I think there's just a feeling that you wouldn't get with replicas. This something about the actual fossils being there, to me, is just, wow, that is however many years old, that came out of a cave in the ground, and here it is right in front of me. I don't know, a cast just doesn't do the same thing.
Well, and I agree with that. You know, it's a little bit like seeing an authentic piece of art or other object. But again, I go back to, it's important that we as scientists, if we say something is authentic, that it is.
Right, right. There's that as well, of course. Now, just looking at some of the questions in the chat here, one of them that catches my interest is, what is your advice as someone who is in this field, who possibly deals with these situations daily, where there are creationists who deny science in every way? How do you stay polite to them and try to educate them?
Right. Okay, so I grew up in the Deep South, and I grew up in a church culture, like many, if not most, in the Deep South. I understand where religion holds an important place in society. I think scientists who deny that that exists are missing a chance to speak to actually the majority of people who consider themselves to be spiritual, if not definitively religious. I think that you Americans, I am a dual citizen of South African American, have learned a very important lesson in the last 40 years of not speaking to everybody. And you know, I every time I come to I speak in churches, I make it in schools, and I do call people stupid, and I discuss the concepts of science with an understanding that individuals may have their own developments or belief systems. But I see science as a fundamentally different thing. It is an observation and exploration of the natural world. I believe that spirituality and religion are largely, perhaps some exceptions have lived in the past, a human condition, at least today. And it deals with good, evil, right, and wrong. Actually have no real in science.
Right.
They form an unmeasurable and untestable thing that every time historically that you see scientists delving into them, you end up with eugenics or things that we shouldn't be delving in. And so I can understand and talk to the separation of those spaces within what you have to acknowledge is the majority of people on the planet.
Right.
And if we're not talking to them, then you and we are going to end up in the kind of situations that most scientists and intellectuals bemoan are occurring worldwide.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very important way to look at it. I mean, if you're not, first of all, you should be polite to everyone. That should just be how it goes. But when you're teaching something that is so important, but someone's so set against it, showing them that you understand them is definitely a way to go. So
well, and listening to them. You
Yeah.
know, that and hearing what they have to say, what are their concerns? When Homo Naledi was announced here, we had a situation in South Africa where I was doing a live radio, and one of the ministers in government, so that would be our level of a Secretary of State or the
Okay.
Secretary of Commerce, something like that, actually called into the radio station and said, "I'm not related to a monkey. You can't say I'm related to a monkey." And I said, much to the surprise of the science interviewer, while he was live, I said, "You're absolutely right. You're not descended from a monkey, but neither is Homo Naledi." And I went into the conceptual teaching moment talking about ape separation, the distant relationship of primates, and the idea that Homo naledi is closely related to us. With removing the fear of the turbocharged racist terror that occurs in South Africa related to the idea of monkey.
Mm-hmm. That's, yeah. Well, it's a good thing that was.
And the minister and I and have lots of discussions.
Well, that's great. What advice would you give to someone like me who's just starting out in their career but wants to really get involved in paleoanthropology? And what would you say you should kind of stay away from?
Okay, that is a very good question. Let me tell you what I passionately tell all of my graduates and the people that I deal with the caveat of the privilege that we have living and working in the places that we do. And then I'll talk sensitively. Another problem where probably Tim White probably would agree with. So I would build a career in the exploration sciences. We need discoveries. What the discoveries my colleagues and I have made over the past year show that we know nothing about them.
Mm-hmm.
What the discoveries of other colleagues around the world shows is that there are discoveries in places we had not thought to look. That these fossils and archaeology and things related to origins are not so rare it's not worth looking for. Also, we had taught, because we created the mythology of the scarcity of hominid fossils, we taught everyone that you had to have a secondary career in the analysis of fossils. What that did was create a haves and a have-nots. And the haves were the people who had fossils or were part of a privileged tiny group who had access to the fossils, or a tiny privileged group who had access to the latest and most expensive technology. Everybody else was a second team player.
Okay.
And forced to live on the scratch of those, often fealty sort of. That is not a good place.
Right.
And so I encourage people to explore, gain the expertise of exploration, gain the skills at discovery, gain skills at being prepared for discovery. If you're going to go in this field, understand geology, understand biology, understand paleontology, good grounding in climatology, evolutionary biology, and go out and explore. Whether that exploration is done in a lab or whether it's done in the field, whether it's done great distances from your home or in remote areas, doesn't really matter. And going back to our earlier conversation about backyard syndrome, you know, if you want to go where you got a good shot of finding something, take a look at where over the last 50 years people got a grant to go explore somewhere and didn't find anything, and no one's got a grant ever since then. It's the way grant organizations operate. They go, oh, didn't we give a grant to someone to go there 30 years ago and they didn't find anything? Let's fund the new shiny. That's backyard syndrome. All great discoveries are going to be faraway locations that no one's been to, because we still live under the mythology of the great exploration and discoveries done where some white guy hasn't been before.
Right.
That's not true.
Of course.
The second part of your question is more difficult because of the system that's been built largely in the developed world. Although it begins to occur into other countries like China, India, and a little bit in Africa, is the machine universities create around the overproduction of PhDs based upon technical laboratory studies. I actually think, even though probably 80 to 90% of PhDs in paleoanthropology are in something like that, it's not the smart way into this field. The first way is the smart way into this field. Because, and I'll tell you where this perspective comes. I have the privilege of putting out these calls to large early career scientists to say, hey, we've got 100 new fossils, and I'm looking to put another team to come work on these, as you see me do many times over the last 8 years, 10 years. And every time I do, I will get Europe or the Americans 10 or 12 or 15 extraordinary young people all doing exactly the same thing. Usually trained by someone who's already on right, who does that exact same thing and owns the data. Which do you think is harder to make? Someone holding up a brand new finger bone we've never seen before from an area we haven't seen before, or one of those dozen or more early career scientists?
That's a very good point. It's a very good point. And it's very, I think that will enlighten a lot of people and bring heart to them, because a lot of people do go that route where you become one of those few that know exactly what you're talking about. You've been trained and you've been everything. But those people that have something just a little different might be the better choice sometimes. I think it's what you're saying.
Let me also just, exploration is neat, but I can tell you that no exploration does not make discoveries.
Right.
We need to train young scientists how to live and survive as they continue to explore with the discoveries that we're making. We have so made 20 generations of paleoanthropologists that the only thing that matters when they can find, a mandible of a hominid where you don't have a career. That's BS. If you go back and look at my publication record prior to, it was littered with a new fossil site called Mutsetsi in the Dolomitic limestone, a fossil from the furthest southern wildebeest discovered, because I understood the game that scientists play. I had to publish 3 to 5 papers a year. I was doing all the things that, and I was having a great time making sure I understood what were important scientific discoveries. And there was never any that likely had not been published about in the scientific literature. And that's true of practically everywhere, particularly when you're dealing with quaternary paleontology.
That's amazing. All right, well, I have one question before letting you go, because I know I've kept you for about an hour. What exactly does it mean to be a National Geographic Explorer in Residence?
Okay, so I am no longer a National Geographic Explorer in Residence. I'm now a National Geographic Explorer at large, because about 4 years ago, the committee spent about 2 years realizing that was a critical statement to say for in residence. So they changed the topic.
Okay. Okay.
What that was, I had an association remarkably with Geographic since they first covered the discovery of those two hominids in Gladysville way back in 1993. And over time, working with them, working with grants, and then through telling about science in the late 90s, winning some of their prizes at that time, and continuing to work discoveries on documentaries that I made, I've formed a very deep and long bond with the organization. I often say, young scientists, National Geographic should not be a sprint organization. It's a marathon organization. They understand the longevity of a career in science and true discovery are very rarely portrayed in the movies. They take time to develop. Individuals take time to develop themselves. And they stay through the many ups and downs and be under no illusions that I've had a very easy, straightforward career. I've had times, big fights in the competitive field. They were with me in 2013, prior to the discovery for my science communication and work with Sediba and longevity. I joined a group of 13 scientists that they had recognized over the years that they consider their most senior explorers. People like Bob Ballard, Sylvia Earle, Jane Goodall, Jared Diamond, Derek and Beverly, on and on, Enrique, and people like that. Who become trusted long-term scientists, and they recognize with explorer the new term is just large, unless you actually are. And then later that year, obviously in November, Naledi came.
Okay. Okay. Well, Professor Berger, I just want to thank you very much on behalf of my entire community and myself especially. I know you're a very busy guy, and I've looked forward to this opportunity ever since I've heard about you. And I'm just very thankful. So thank you for being here with us today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Wonderful talking with you. Hope we can do it again sometime soon. I think a lot of us are going to have a lot of time on it.
Yes, I agree. We should definitely revisit.
All righty.
Right. We'll
Take
talk
care.
to you
Bye,
later.
everyone.
Bye.